Morning, Dan and Amy. So 10 a.m. this morning, Loretta Lynch is going to stand on a dais with Tiny Dancer. He'll be the one on the footstool. And release their report about the Chicago Police Department, which Tiny Dancer says he hasn't seen it all, but he's going to embrace totally.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a fascinating statement in and of itself.
He has seen parts of it, and he's also questioning the new future administration. That's what he said. He saw parts of it.
He said, actually,
One section.
ABC, while he hasn't seen it, Emmanuel said he plans to embrace what is expected to be a highly critical Department of Justice report. While he has not seen it. I don't know one section of the report, said Emmanuel. So, no, he hasn't seen it. And he's embracing it in toto
But
anyway.
he knows what's coming because Loretta Lynch yesterday was in Baltimore. But this is what Mayor Emmanuel had to say.
I don't know what the next administration's interests are. I do know what our interests are. And we as a city are on the road to reform and doing it in a way that our police officers are supported.
Well, that's good news. That has got to be just music to the ears of Chicago Police rank and file and their president, FOP President Dean Angelo, who joins us now. Dean, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good morning.
So Ram says this report facilitates the path to reform for Chicago police, and that path will ultimately lead to a place where police know they are supported. Is that your instinct in terms of what this report will engender?
Well, if you look at some of the previous reports, they talk about training, they talk about equipment, they talk about technology, and there's always a price tag attached to that. With some of the information that I've been dealing with, discussions and interviews over the past couple of days about sources that are out there talking about violations of civil rights and issues of that nature, that concerns me, and, it concerns our members. We've been kicked in the shins for several years now, and we're, bracing for another one at this stage. The support's nice to hear. It'd be nicer if we actually see it facilitated, but, we're in a holding pattern at this stage.
So do you believe federal oversight is necessary?
I really don't. I think that the tools and the personnel that are here are skilled enough to do their job if they are allowed to do their job. We've got some people out of the department, although we've lost several, since Jody Weiss came in. But there's a belief that we know what we're doing. We're the police out there. We're the ones facing this uptick in violence. We're the ones that realize what works, what doesn't work. Everybody else has got their opinions, and opinions, everybody has one. So that's, they're allowed to do that, and no one's saying that you shouldn't stop conversing or talking, but to implement documents such as the investigatory stop that was mandated by the ACLU in August of 15. Dan, when we talked, I told you this is coming. I told you the violence was going to uptick.
Yep.
I told you we'll be at 700 murders before you know it, and look where we're at. And that was quite a while ago.
That was in the spring. I remember it, and I remember talking about it, and everything you said would happen, unfortunately, has transpired, and yet the culpability seems to be directed by politicians to the police, as if the civilian leadership of the city has no responsibility in the direction of the police and what they're empowered to do or not do. And so I just see this report today being something that simply echoes the Lori Lightfoot report. We've got a problem in the Chicago Police Department, which is nearly 50% minority in terms of the racial composition of the officers. And it's systemic racism where Chicago police as a group, and it'll just be kind of, a group guilt by association. Chicago police as a group do not respect the rights of minority families in Chicago. That's essentially the conclusion of the Lori Lightfoot report. Why would Loretta Lynch's report be any different?
Well, I met with, as recently as December 13th, with some representatives from the DOJ's investigative team. And I put that exact question to them. I said, please tell me you're not going to buy into that. That's going to be your barometer on this. Because, the first couple of chapters of that document belong on the bottom of your birdcage. the NAMI, the mental health issues, the technology issues, are credible. The first parts of that document are as incredible as they can be. And they're based on false data collecting. They're based on a bias. Then I asked the DOJ, I said, if you come out with a narrative like that, you're going to lose what remains of any type of basis of support or hope that these officers have that they're going to get a fair shake. Because that document was not a fair shake. I've talked to people that were involved in the NAMI and the technology component, and that narrative was not what they signed off on. And that's not what they expected with that report. They were taken aback by it, and they've apologized to me, although they're not the author, but they're mentioned in the as an investigator or a contributor to it. So it caught a lot of people by surprise, even some people that were the participants in that document.
Do you think Loretta Lynch will do what she did in Baltimore? The city of Baltimore, they reached an agreement on a consent decree that mandates reforms of the city's police department. Do you think that's going to happen in Chicago?
Well, there's no time frame to do that. This final report is probably a year ahead of any type of consent decree, and that's typically how these things work. Final report comes out first, and then a consent decree follows. But talking to that point, they did Puerto Rico. There's 15,000 officers in Puerto Rico. It took them 3 years. They did Cleveland. There was 1,500 in Cleveland. It took 19 months. Ferguson's got 72 people in that department. It took 6 months. If you look at the time frame that the DOJ announced, it was December 7th, I think, of 2015. They're not hitting the ground running over the holiday season in 2015. They started typing after the presidential election ended in November. I'm looking at about a 10-month window of this document. And for 12,000 people in a department that this size, that's pretty quick. That's almost lightning speed to get to a conclusion. But I said to them, again, on December 13th, you're going to put this out before the inauguration. I mean, it's obvious. Well, that's not necessarily so. We're not looking at it that way. But, look where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Well, so let me ask you this. If this oversight is needed and if a consent decree would be forthcoming, isn't that an indictment of the civilian political leadership of the city when you have to have the federal government come in to provide that kind of oversight? I mean, you could argue, I guess it's both. It's an abuse of discretion by the Department of Justice, but it also is the Department of Justice saying that the city's political leadership has failed.
Well, everything's connected to the city hall, and every department works. It's the hierarchy of the structure itself. So when someone comes on from the outside and does an overview of your organization and tells you don't know what you're doing or you need our help to do it right, it doesn't bode well for the organization or the municipality that's involved. That being said, agreeing to something preemptively like this or jumping to an agreement before you open the cover, boy, I like this book, but I haven't read it yet. It seems like it's,
defies common sense a bit. Yeah. It just seems like it may be a bit politicized. Yeah. Let me ask you the question from the other side. To people who are going to be persuaded by a lot of the racial demagoguery that comes from so many politicians and erstwhile politicians in the city that are going to, read the top lines of these reports like the Lori Lightfoot report and believe there is this systemic problem in the Chicago Police Department and black families and Latino families are being treated differently than white families. For example, in poor areas, people are treated differently than in the wealthier areas of Chicago. What do you say to those people with legitimate concerns, maybe misunderstandings about Chicago police?
Well, there's two segments of those neighborhoods that are under fire right now, and you've got the loud voice that we see, taking over the streets or standing on the counters at Macy's or on lunch tables while people are trying to dine. But you also have the families that no one's ever spoken to. They've not knocked on their door. They've not sat in someone's living room or at their kitchen table and asked them, what do you want? What do you want to see from the police? Because it's their corner that's gone. And I mentioned this to you again, earlier when we spoke. You lose the corner, you lose your block, you lose your community. They want their community back. If you look at our numbers, we've got nearly 800 murders. Let's call it 700. And let's look at the 4,300 people that were shot. Every one of those 4,300 shootings was actually an attempted murder. They're not shooting to scare or shooting to wound someone. They're shooting to kill them. If that guy's aim is better or that shoulder shot moves to the heart a couple of inches below, we're at 5,000 murders. Those families are sick of burying their loved ones. They're sick of knowing somebody that's at the morgue. They're sick of going to a prayer service or a candlelight vigil in their neighborhood, and they want it to end. And the people that are going to contribute the most to end that are driving around in a blue and white car.
Dean, I wanted to quickly ask you. Yeah,
that's what we need to get to. That's the realization people need to come to at some point. Get these police the tools and the support organizationally and politically that they need to do the job, and let's start getting a handle on this violence.
Dean, considering what happened in Fort Lauderdale airport shooting, on January 6th, now aviation police officers at O'Hare who aren't allowed to carry guns have been told to that they won't be sent to disturbances in baggage claim or other places outside of security. What's your response to that?
Well, there's a lot of variables around that situation there. You've got some senior individuals that have transferred from one agency to another that are working, for the agency, for the Department of Aviation Police. They are fully sworn, so, they have the ability to carry. They don't have the ability to carry at the airport. I think there's some federal restrictions there. Not all that familiar with the language of the SCIU contracts, but I do know that there's a lot of talk about arming them. There's also a lot of talk on the other side about the concerns about arming them. So it's a discussion that's going to be going on, and I think it's going to happen at a quicker pace right now based on what happened in Florida.
If they're fully sworn officers, and by the way, O'Hare is the only place where this is the case, of course. If they're fully sworn officers, why shouldn't they be able to carry? Why shouldn't they carry?
Well, and that's the argument, and if you have a 70-year-old retired police officer that now is working there as a second job after his retirement, and they're 70 years old, people are looking at their, ability to maintain control of their weapon in a situation. So there is a lot of there's about 3 different arguments for this entire event about arming those officers at the airport. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it pretty soon.
Yeah, I know 70-year-olds who can fill a target with center mass holes from 50 yards. So I don't know, but it seems to me.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. Well, he's Dean Angelo, of course, our friend. He's the president of the Chicago Fraternal Order Police. Dean, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.